fall of Babylon. The prophet Isaiah wrote approximately 150 years before the event. His words were specific. Babylon would fall not through siege or starvation, but through conquest by a leader from the east. Isaiah named him Cyrus, a king who had not yet been born when the prophecy was written. The text described how Babylon's gates would be left open, how the Euphrates River would be diverted, how the conquerors would enter without battle. The city would fall in a single night. Jeremiah added details decades later. Babylon's walls, the widest and highest in the ancient world, would not save it. The city's gods would be shamed. Its warriors would not fight. The destruction would be so complete that Babylon would never be inhabited again. Wild animals would make their homes in the ruins. The proud empire that conquered Jerusalem would itself be conquered. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia marched on Babylon. His engineers diverted the Euphrates River, lowering water levels in the channels that flowed through the city. Persian troops entered along the riverbed. According to ancient accounts, a festival was underway inside Babylon. The gates had been left open, guards were distracted or drunk. The city fell without significant resistance. King Belshazzar died that night. By morning, Babylon belonged to Persia. The specificity is striking. Isaiah named Cyrus a century and a half before his birth. The method of conquest, entering through the river, matches historical accounts. The prophecy that Babylon would fall in one night aligns with the rapid takeover during the festival. Jeremiah's prediction that Babylon would become uninhabited proved true over subsequent centuries. After Alexander the Great's death, Babylon declined. By the 1st century CE, it was largely abandoned. Today the ruins sit empty in Iraq, home to occasional wildlife, exactly as described. Skeptics argue the prophecies were written after the events, then backdated. The texts could have been composed during or after the Persian conquest, attributed to earlier prophets to give them credibility. This theory cannot be definitively disproven. However, manuscript evidence suggests the core text existed before Cyrus. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain Isaiah fragments dated to approximately 200 BCE, well after Cyrus, but centuries before Christ, confirming the text's antiquity if not its original dating. Whether divinely inspired or historically backdated, the Babylonian prophecies represent remarkable alignment between prediction and outcome. The empire that seemed eternal fell exactly as foretold. The city never regained its glory. Persian conquest marked the beginning of the end for Mesopotamian civilization's greatest urban center. Destruction of Tyre. The prophet Ezekiel delivered his oracle against Tyre around 587 BCE. The coastal city-state had become wealthy through maritime trade. Its defences seemed impregnable. Built partially on an island just offshore, Tyre controlled Mediterranean commerce. Ezekiel declared that many nations would come against Tyre in waves, like the sea itself. The city would be scraped clean, reduced to bare rock. Fishermen would spread their nets there. The city would never be rebuilt. The prophecies came in stages, matching historical events centuries apart. First, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon besieged Tyre beginning around 585 BCE. The siege lasted 13 years. According to Ezekiel's own later writings, when the Babylonians finally breached the mainland city, they found little wealth. The island fortress remained untaken. The Tyrians had evacuated their treasure by sea. Nebuchadnezzar's army gained no significant plunder for their efforts, but Ezekiel had spoken of multiple nations coming in waves. The island city endured for another 2.5 centuries. Then Alexander the Great arrived in 332 BCE. Tyre refused him entry. Alexander responded with unprecedented engineering. His army built a causeway from the mainland to the island, nearly half a mile long. They demolished the ruins of old Tyre on the shore, using the rubble as building material. Stones, timber, even dirt. Everything was thrown into the sea to create the land bridge. The prophecy specified the city would be scraped clean to bare rock. Alexander's causeway construction required exactly that. Workers stripped the mainland site down to bedrock, gathering every piece of usable material. When finished, the former city location was indeed bare stone, scraped clean as Ezekiel described. Alexander's siege lasted 7 months. His army finally breached the island's walls. Thousands of Tyrians died. Thousands more were sold into slavery. The city never recovered its former glory. While Tyre exists as a modern Lebanese town, it is not the commercial empire it once was. The ancient Phoenician city's power ended with Alexander's conquest. The causeway Alexander built created a permanent land connection. Sediment accumulated around it over centuries. Today the former island is a peninsula. Fishermen do spread nets in areas that were once Tyre's harbour and city streets. The prophecies' imagery proved literal. Critics point out that Tyre was not utterly destroyed. People continued living there. The city exists today. However, the prophecy concerned Tyre's status as a dominant trade power. That ended permanently. The specific city-state Ezekiel condemned, Phoenician Tyre with its island fortress and Mediterranean commerce monopoly, ceased to exist. Later settlements on the site are technically different entities, rebuilt by different peoples with different names under different political systems. The detail about scraping the city to bare rock is the most striking fulfillment. No one in Ezekiel's time could have predicted the specific method Alexander would use. The causeway construction required precisely what the prophecy described. Whether coincidence or genuine foresight, the alignment between prediction and event remains remarkable. Croesus and the Oracle of Delphi. King Croesus of Lydia ruled one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the ancient world during the 6th century BCE. He faced a decision. The Persian Empire under Cyrus was expanding. Should Croesus attack first or wait? He consulted the Oracle of Delphi, the most famous prophetic site in Greece. The oracle's responses were delivered through a priestess called the Pythia, who entered a trance state and spoke cryptic messages. Before trusting the oracle with his important question, Croesus tested it. He sent messengers to multiple oracles across the Mediterranean with instructions. On a specific day, they would ask what Croesus was doing at that exact moment. Most oracles gave vague or wrong answers. Delphi's response was precise. The Pythia declared Croesus was boiling a lamb and tortoise together in a bronze cauldron with a bronze lid. This was exactly correct. Croesus had chosen this bizarre activity specifically because it was something no one could guess. Convinced of Delphi's power, Croesus asked his crucial question: should he attack Persia? The oracle responded that if Croesus crossed the Halys River and attacked Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Encouraged, Croesus assembled his army and invaded Persian territory. The campaign was a disaster. Cyrus defeated the Lydian army decisively. Croesus retreated to his capital, Sardis. Cyrus pursued and besieged the city. Sardis fell. Croesus was captured. His kingdom was absorbed into the Persian Empire. According to Herodotus, Croesus sent messengers to Delphi demanding to know why the oracle had lied. The Pythia's response was devastating. The prophecy had been accurate. Croesus did destroy a great empire, his own. The oracle had not specified which empire would fall. Croesus assumed it meant Persia. His assumption proved catastrophic. This prophecy is famous not because it predicted an unlikely event, but because it demonstrates the oracle's legendary ambiguity. The Delphic oracle built its reputation on responses that could be interpreted multiple ways. Regardless of the outcome, the prophecy could be claimed as accurate. This technique ensured the oracle's credibility survived regardless of events. However, the test Croesus conducted beforehand is harder to dismiss. The lamb and tortoise in the bronze cauldron represent specific, verifiable information the oracle could not have obtained through normal means. No messengers travelling from Lydia to Greece and back would have known what Croesus was doing on that particular day, since he chose the activity randomly and performed it in private. Rational explanations exist. Perhaps Croesus invented or exaggerated the test story to justify his trust in the oracle. Maybe spies observed his activities. Information networks in the ancient world were more sophisticated than often assumed. Traders, diplomats, and travellers constantly moved between regions. Someone might have witnessed Croesus's test and sent word ahead to Delphi. Another possibility involves psychological manipulation. Oracles ask careful questions before giving answers. Through conversation, the Pythia might have learned enough to make educated guesses that seem miraculous. The trance state might have been genuine, induced by geological factors. Delphi sits above a geological fault. Some researchers propose that ethylene gas or other volatile compounds seeping from the earth created hallucinogenic effects. In such states, the Pythia might have accessed intuitive or subconscious knowledge that produced surprisingly accurate insights. The prophecy's fulfillment regarding the empire's destruction is indisputable. Lydia fell. Croesus lost everything. The oracle was literally correct, even if Croesus misinterpreted the meaning. This combination of ambiguity and undeniable fulfillment made Delphi's reputation. Leaders across the ancient world consulted the oracle for centuries, convinced of its power despite countless misinterpretations like Croesus's own. Destruction of Helike. The Greek city of Helike sat on the southern shore of the Gulf of Corinth. In 373 BCE, the city was prosperous and powerful. It led the Achaean League, a confederation of city-states. Helike was also home to a famous sanctuary of Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes. According to ancient sources, the Helicans offended their patron deity. A group of Ionian refugees fleeing war sought sanctuary at Poseidon's temple. They clung to the god's statue as suppliants, invoking sacred protection. The Helicans drove them away, killing some. This violated ancient Greek religious law. Temples were inviolate. Suppliants under divine protection could not be harmed without invoking the god's wrath. Warnings followed. The historian Aelian records that 5 days before the disaster, all mice, weasels, snakes, and centipedes fled Helike. They moved inland in streams. Residents noticed this mass exodus, but did not understand its meaning. Some oracles and seers warned that Poseidon's anger would manifest. The city ignored these warnings. On a winter night, an earthquake struck. The ground shook violently. Buildings collapsed. Then the sea withdrew rapidly from the shore. Moments later, a massive wave surged inland. The tsunami overwhelmed Helike completely. The city sank. Some accounts claim the ground itself subsided, dropping below sea level. Others emphasized the wave's destructive power. Either way, Helike vanished overnight. The disaster killed approximately 2,000 people. 10 Spartan ships anchored offshore were destroyed. According to Pausanias, writing centuries later, the ruins of Helike remained visible underwater on calm days. The tops of trees and buildings could be seen beneath the waves. Fishermen avoided the area, fearing their nets would snag on submerged structures. This prophecy differs from others. It was not a specific written prediction, but warnings based on religious transgression. The principle was clear in Greek thought. Violating sacred law brought divine punishment. Poseidon, as god of earthquakes and the sea, punished appropriately. The earthquake and tsunami were his instruments. The animal behavior is particularly interesting. Modern understanding of earthquakes confirms that animals often detect seismic activity before humans. Changes in electromagnetic fields, ground vibrations below human perception thresholds, or release of gases from stressed rock formations might trigger animal flight responses. What ancient Greeks interpreted as omen, modern science explains as sensitive biological detection systems. Archaeological searches for Helike proved difficult for centuries. The site was lost. Pausanias' description of underwater ruins suggested the city lay offshore. Excavations in the 20th century found nothing. Then in 2001, archaeologists located Helike's remains. The city was not underwater offshore. It lay buried inland beneath several meters of sediment. Tectonic activity had shifted the coastline. River deposits covered the ruins over centuries. The discoveries confirmed the disaster. Buildings showed signs of sudden collapse. A layer of sediment indicated rapid flooding. The archaeological evidence matched ancient accounts. Helike had been destroyed in a single night by earthquake and water. The prophecy's fulfillment was immediate and total. The warnings proved accurate within days. Whether Poseidon's wrath or geological coincidence, the correlation between predicted divine punishment and actual disaster was perfect. Helike served as a cautionary tale throughout antiquity. Other cities were warned. Do not violate sacred law. The gods are watching, punishment is certain. Omens of Vesuvius. In 79 CE, the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum thrived in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. The mountain was recognized as volcanic, but it had been dormant for centuries. Residents considered it safe. Then the warnings began. Earthquakes increased in frequency during the weeks before the eruption. A major earthquake in 62 CE had damaged Pompeii severely. 17 years later, many buildings were still under repair. In the days immediately before the eruption, tremors became constant. Springs and wells dried up or changed temperature. Water sources that had been reliable for generations stopped flowing or turned brackish. Ancient sources mention prophecies and omens. Pliny the Younger, who witnessed the eruption from across the bay, does not record specific predictions, but other writers reference warnings from seers and unusual natural phenomena. Birds abandoned the area. Dogs howled continuously. The sea behaved strangely, withdrawing from the shore, then surging back. No written prophecy declared that Vesuvius would erupt on a specific date. However, the concept of omens in Roman religion meant that unusual natural events signaled coming disaster. Priests called augurs and haruspices specialized in reading signs. Birds flying in unusual patterns, lightning striking specific locations, animals behaving abnormally, all carried meaning. These experts would have recognized the mounting omens as warnings of catastrophe. The eruption began on the morning of August the 24th. A massive column of ash and pumice shot into the sky. The cloud rose miles high, spreading across the region. Pompeii, located southeast of Vesuvius, lay directly in the path of prevailing winds. Ash and rock began falling on the city immediately. The accumulation rate was several inches per hour. Many residents fled during the early stages. They recognized the danger. However, thousands remained, sheltering in buildings or attempting to protect their property. As the eruption intensified, pyroclastic flows surged down the mountain. These superheated clouds of gas and rock moved at tremendous speeds. When they reached Pompeii, everyone still in the city died instantly. The heat killed them before they could suffocate from ash. Bodies were buried where they fell, preserved in volcanic material. Herculaneum, located closer to Vesuvius but on the opposite side, initially seemed spared. Prevailing winds carried ash away from the town. Residents may have thought they were safe. Then the pyroclastic flows changed direction. Successive surges buried Herculaneum under 60 feet of material. The preservation was even better than Pompeii's. Organic materials, including wooden furniture, food, and even scrolls survived, carbonized but intact. The prophecy here is less about specific predictions and more about recognized warning signs. Roman augurs understood that nature provided omens. Earthquakes, especially increasing sequences, signaled that gods were disturbed. Wells drying up suggested subterranean forces disrupting water sources. Animal flight indicated environmental dangers humans could not yet perceive. Modern science explains these omens. Increased seismic activity before volcanic eruptions is now well documented. Magma, moving underground, causes earthquakes. Changes in groundwater result from heat and pressure alterations below the surface. Animals detect these changes through senses more acute than humans possess. What Romans interpreted as divine warnings were actually measurable physical phenomena indicating volcanic unrest. The tragedy is that Romans possessed the knowledge to interpret the omens correctly. They understood that these signs meant danger. Many people fled and survived. Those who ignored the warnings or failed to act quickly enough died. The prophecy was fulfilled in the most devastating way possible. Archaeological excavations of Pompeii and Herculaneum began in the 18th century. The preserved cities provide an unparalleled window into Roman life. Buildings, art, food, furniture, even graffiti survived. The bodies, preserved as voids in the hardened ash were filled with plaster by excavators. These casts show people in their final moments. Some are curled in fetal positions, others cover their faces. Families huddle together. The images are haunting reminders that ignored omens carry consequences. Fall of Jerusalem. The prophecies concerning Jerusalem came in waves across centuries. The city faced two major destructions, both predicted by prophets who warned that religious and moral corruption would bring disaster. The first destruction was prophesied by Jeremiah. During the late 7th and early 6th centuries BCE, Jeremiah warned that Jerusalem would fall to Babylon. The kingdom of Judah had turned away from monotheism, tolerating worship of other gods. Social injustice was rampant. The wealthy oppressed the poor. Jeremiah declared that God would use Babylon as an instrument of punishment. The city would burn. The temple would be destroyed. The people would be carried into exile. The political situation made this prediction seem unlikely. Judah was a vassal of Egypt, not Babylon. Egypt was still powerful. Many in Jerusalem believed that God would never allow his temple to be destroyed. The city was sacred. Previous invasions had been repelled miraculously. Jeremiah was arrested multiple times for his prophecies. He was accused of treason, of undermining morale during wartime. In 597 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon captured Jerusalem. He carried King Jehoiakim into exile along with thousands of skilled workers and elites. A puppet king, Zedekiah, was installed. Jeremiah warned that further rebellion would bring total destruction. Zedekiah rebelled anyway. In 587 BCE, Babylon besieged Jerusalem again. The siege lasted 2 years. Starvation devastated the population. In 586 BCE, the walls were breached, the city was burned, Solomon's temple was demolished, the remaining population was exiled to Babylon. Jeremiah's prophecy was fulfilled in specific detail. Jerusalem burned, the temple was destroyed. The exile lasted approximately 70 years, another detail Jeremiah had predicted. The Babylonian captivity ended when Cyrus of Persia conquered Babylon and allowed Jews to return and rebuild. The second destruction came 6.5 centuries later. Jesus of Nazareth, speaking around 30 CE, predicted Jerusalem's coming destruction. He wept over the city, declaring that not one stone of the temple would be left standing on another. His disciples, marveling at the temple's massive construction, were shocked by this prophecy. The temple stones weighed many tons each. How could such a structure be completely demolished? Jesus connected the prophecy to warnings about false messiahs and wars. He told his followers that when they saw armies surrounding Jerusalem, they should flee to the mountains. Those inside the city should not remain. Terrible destruction was coming. In 66 CE, Jewish revolt against Roman rule began. Initial successes emboldened the rebels. They believed God would deliver them as he had delivered their ancestors from Egypt. In 67 CE, Rome responded with overwhelming force. General Vespasian led legions into Judea, systematically crushing resistance. When Vespasian became emperor in 69 CE, his son Titus took command. In 70 CE, Titus besieged Jerusalem. The city's internal conflicts between rival Jewish factions weakened the defense. Food supplies dwindled. Starvation reached catastrophic levels. The historian Josephus, a Jewish commander who defected to Rome and witnessed the siege, recorded horrors. Mothers killed and ate their own children. Bodies piled in the streets. Desperate defenders fought Romans, each other, and reality itself. In August, Roman soldiers breached the walls. Fighting continued street by street. The Temple Mount became the final stronghold. Josephus claims Titus wanted to preserve the temple. However, during the battle, fire started. The temple burned. The gold decorations melted, flowing into cracks between stones. Afterward, Roman soldiers pried the stones apart to recover the gold. The prophecy was fulfilled literally. Not one stone was left standing on another. The destruction was total. Buildings were demolished. Much of the population was killed or enslaved. Jerusalem ceased to exist as a Jewish city. Rome built a new settlement on the ruins, banning Jews from entering. The temple was never rebuilt. Only the western retaining wall of the Temple Mount survived, now known as the Western Wall or Wailing Wall. Both destructions followed the same pattern. Prophets warned that moral and religious corruption would bring disaster. Political leaders ignored the warnings. Foreign armies destroyed the city and temple. The people were exiled or scattered. The specific details, especially regarding the temple's complete demolition in 70 CE, were fulfilled with precision. Skeptics argue that the prophecies regarding the 70 CE destruction were written after the event. The Gospels reached their final written form decades after Jesus' death. Prophecies could have been inserted or emphasized after the destruction to portray Jesus as prescient. However, early Christian communities clearly expected Jerusalem's destruction. They fled the city before the final siege. Historians note that Christians largely avoided the catastrophe by following Jesus' advice to flee when armies approached. This suggests that prophecy existed and was taken seriously before the event occurred. The fall of Jerusalem, twice prophesied and twice fulfilled, stands as one of history's clearest examples of prediction matching outcome. Whether divine revelation or insightful analysis of political and moral trajectories, the prophecies proved devastatingly accurate. Mayan eclipses. The Maya developed sophisticated astronomical knowledge over centuries of observation. Their calendar systems tracked celestial cycles with remarkable precision. Multiple interlocking calendars measured days, months, years, and vast cosmic cycles. The Tzolk'in was a 260-day ritual calendar. The Hab was a 365-day solar calendar. Combined, these created the calendar round, a 52-year cycle. Beyond this, the long count tracked time from a mythological creation date. Astronomical tables recorded in Mayan codices and carved on stone monuments tracked Venus, Mars, the Moon, and other celestial bodies. The Dresden Codex, one of 4 surviving Mayan books, contains detailed eclipse tables. These tables predict lunar and solar eclipses across centuries. Eclipse prediction requires understanding the Saros cycle. Eclipses repeat in patterns roughly every 18 years and 11 days. Once this cycle is recognized, future eclipses become predictable. The Maya identified this pattern independently. Their tables account for the Saros cycle and related periodicities. The Dresden Codex eclipse table covers approximately 33 years. It lists 69 potential eclipse events. These are not all eclipses visible from the Mayan region. The table includes all eclipses that could theoretically occur, whether visible from Central America or not. This suggests the Maya understood eclipses as astronomical phenomena, not merely local events. Verification of Mayan predictions came through comparing their tables with modern astronomical calculations. Researchers reconstructed which eclipses would have been visible from Mayan territories during the periods covered by various inscriptions and codices. The correlation is striking. Mayan predictions align with actual eclipses. One particularly impressive example involves inscriptions at the site of Copan. Stela, 3 records a date in the Mayan calendar corresponding to December 6th, 795 CE in the Western calendar. The inscription includes astronomical information. Modern calculations confirm a total lunar eclipse occurred on that exact date, visible from Copan. At Palenque, inscriptions reference astronomical events during the reign of various kings. Cross-referencing these dates with eclipse tables shows matches. The Maya not only predicted eclipses, but recorded successful predictions as demonstrations of royal power and priestly knowledge. Why were eclipse predictions important? Eclipses terrified ancient peoples worldwide. The sun or moon disappearing seemed catastrophic. Cultures developed myths explaining eclipses as cosmic battles or celestial dragons devouring the sun. Being able to predict eclipses gave power. Priests who knew when darkness would come could present themselves as having control over cosmic forces. They could reassure populations that the sun would return. Mayan kings used eclipse predictions to legitimize their rule. If royal astronomers predicted an eclipse that then occurred, it demonstrated the king's connection to divine forces. The gods revealed secrets to the king. This knowledge supported the ideology that rulers were semi-divine intermediaries between humans and gods. The accuracy of Mayan predictions is undeniable. Modern astronomers, using mathematical models of celestial mechanics, can calculate eclipses for any date past or future. Comparing Mayan predictions with these calculations confirms the Maya got it right. They understood cycles. They maintained centuries of observational records. They developed mathematical methods to extrapolate future events from past patterns. The prophecy aspect is clear. Mayan texts state that on specific future dates, the sun or moon will be eclipsed. Those dates arrived. The eclipses occurred. The predictions were fulfilled. This is repeatable, verifiable, scientific prophecy. The Maya did not claim divine revelation for eclipse predictions. They based them on observation and mathematics. Nevertheless, to their contemporaries, the ability to predict cosmic events must have seemed miraculous. The Dresden Codex survived the Spanish conquest by chance. Most Mayan books were burned by Spanish priests who considered them pagan idolatry. Only 4 codices escaped destruction. The Dresden Codex reached Europe, eventually ending up in Dresden, Germany, hence its name. Scholars did not understand Mayan writing for centuries. Only in the 20th century was significant progress made in deciphering the script. The eclipse tables were recognized relatively early because astronomical information is easier to interpret than historical or mythological texts. Modern Mayan descendants maintain awareness of their ancestors' astronomical achievements. The knowledge of calendars and cycles was partially preserved through oral tradition, even after literacy in Mayan glyphs was lost. Today, efforts to revive traditional Mayan calendar systems draw on both archaeological discoveries and living cultural memory. The Mayan eclipse prophecies represent humanity's intellectual capacity to understand and predict nature. Through patient observation, careful record-keeping, and mathematical insight, the Maya mastered celestial cycles. Their success demonstrates that prophecy need not invoke supernatural powers. Systematic study of the natural world allows accurate prediction of future events. The Maya proved this over 1,000 years before modern science formalized such methods. Hopi prophecies. The Hopi people of the American Southwest maintain oral traditions including prophecies passed through generations. These prophecies describe future events, some of which have been interpreted as fulfilled. The accuracy of these interpretations is debated, but certain predictions align remarkably with historical developments. One prophecy speaks of men arriving from the east in boats. They would bring new ways and disrupt traditional life. This is interpreted as predicting European contact. Spanish explorers reached the American Southwest in the 16th century. They came from the east, from the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic beyond. They brought Christianity, metal tools, horses, and diseases. Traditional Hopi life was disrupted fundamentally. Another prophecy mentions roads of stone crossing the land. In the 19th century, railroads were built across the American West. To the Hopi, these tracks made of iron and steel, laid on stone ballast, would have appeared as roads of stone. The transcontinental railroad connected east and west, bringing waves of settlers into indigenous territories. A prophecy about spiderwebs stretched across the sky has been interpreted as predicting telegraph and telephone lines. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, wires crisscrossed the landscape, strung on poles, connecting distant locations. From a distance, these wires resemble spiderwebs. The comparison is apt. The technology allowed instant communication across vast distances, something unimaginable in traditional Hopi culture. One of the more striking prophecies speaks of a house in the sky. People would live there, looking down on Earth. This has been interpreted as predicting space stations. The International Space Station, permanently inhabited since 2000, orbits above Earth. Astronauts live there for months, observing the planet from orbit. To anyone describing such a concept before its realization, a house in the sky is a reasonable description. Skeptics raise valid concerns about Hopi prophecies. The oral tradition allows prophecies to evolve over time. Each generation retelling the stories might unconsciously modify them, incorporating knowledge of recent events. What seems like fulfilled prophecy might actually be retrofitting, adjusting the prophecy to match known history. Additionally, many prophecies are vague enough to fit multiple interpretations. Men arriving from the east could describe any migration or invasion. Roads of stone might refer to Roman roads or modern highways as easily as railroads. Spiderwebs in the sky could be airplane contrails or power lines as well as telegraph wires. A house in the sky might describe clouds or mountains to ancient peoples. However, the cumulative effect of multiple prophecies aligning with specific historical developments is striking. The probability that random predictions would match so many distinct technological and social changes is low. Either the Hopi possessed genuine foresight, or their oral tradition was remarkably preserved and documented before the fulfillment of these prophecies. Some Hopi prophecies were recorded by anthropologists in the early 20th century, before certain fulfillments occurred. Frank Waters published the Book of the Hopi in 1963. Documenting prophecies told to him by Hopi elders. Some of these prophecies had not yet been fulfilled when recorded, lending credibility to claims of genuine prediction rather than post hoc invention. The prophecies also include warnings. The Hopi speak of different worlds, each ending in destruction when humanity becomes corrupt. The current world is the fourth world. If humans do not live in balance with nature, this world will also end. Signs of the end include environmental destruction, moral decline, and technological overreach. These warnings remain unfulfilled or perhaps are in the process of fulfillment. Climate change, pollution, and social instability could be interpreted as signs the prophecies describe. Hopi religious leaders have shared prophecies publicly at various times. In 1948, Hopi elders sent messages to world leaders warning of coming catastrophes if humanity did not change its ways. They addressed the United Nations multiple times. These public declarations fixed the prophecies in the historical record, making later alteration more difficult. The role of prophecy in Hopi culture is different from Western concepts. Prophecy is not primarily about predicting the future, it is about guidance. The prophecies warn what will happen if certain paths are followed. They provide a roadmap for living in balance. If the prophecies come true, it means humanity failed to heed the warnings. In this sense, fulfilled prophecy represents failure, not success. Modern Hopi continue to reference the prophecies. They see them as relevant to contemporary challenges. Environmental destruction, cultural erosion, and loss of traditional ways are interpreted through the lens of ancient warnings. Whether the prophecies are literally true or metaphorically powerful, they continue shaping Hopi responses to the modern world. The accuracy of Hopi prophecies, particularly the specific predictions about technological developments, remains a subject of fascination. Whether attributed to genuine foresight, cultural wisdom, or retrospective interpretation, the alignment between prediction and reality is noteworthy. The prophecies represent an indigenous perspective on historical change, framing European contact and industrialization as foreseen catastrophes rather than unexpected disruptions. Zhou invasion. During the late Shang dynasty in ancient China, approximately 1100 to 1050 BCE, the practice of oracle bone divination was widespread. Royal diviners would inscribe questions on turtle shells or ox bones, apply heat, and interpret the resulting cracks. The patterns were believed to reveal divine answers. These inscriptions are the earliest known Chinese writing. The Shang kings regularly consulted oracles about military campaigns, harvests, illnesses, and other matters. Oracle bones from the reign of the last Shang king, Di Xin, show increasing anxiety about the Zhou, a subject people on the western frontier. The inscriptions asked repeatedly whether the Zhou will rebel, whether military action should be taken against them, whether sacrifices to ancestors and gods will ensure victory. The oracles warned of danger. Multiple inscriptions suggest inauspicious signs. The cracks indicated that the Zhou posed a threat. However, The interpretations were ambiguous enough that King Di-Xin did not act decisively. He underestimated the Zhou, confident in Shang military superiority. The Shang had ruled for centuries. Their bronze weapons and chariot warfare were unmatched. Around 1046 BCE, the Zhou under King Wu launched a rebellion. They formed alliances with other subject peoples and tribes. The rebellion grew into a massive uprising. The decisive battle occurred at Muye. The Shang army was large but demoralized. Many Shang soldiers defected or refused to fight. The Zhou won decisively. King Di-Xin fled to his palace and burned himself alive. The Zhou conquest marked a dynastic change. The mandate of heaven concept, central to Chinese political philosophy, was formalized by the Zhou to justify their rebellion. They argued that the Shang had lost heaven's favor through corruption and tyranny. The successful rebellion proved heaven had withdrawn the mandate and granted it to the Zhou. The oracle bone inscriptions are the prophecy. They warned King Di-Xin that the Zhou were dangerous. The warnings were ignored or misinterpreted. The prophecy was fulfilled through the Shang dynasty's fall. Later, Zhou historians emphasized this narrative. The oracles had spoken. The Shang king failed to listen. Heaven used the Zhou as instruments of correction. The oracle bones survive as archaeological artifacts. Thousands have been excavated from Anyang, the last Shang capital. They can be read and dated. The progression of divinations shows increasing concern about the Zhou in the years leading up to the rebellion. This is not retrospective prophecy. These are contemporary records showing that the Shang leadership knew the Zhou were a threat, but failed to respond adequately. The interpretation of oracle cracks was subjective. Diviners might see what rulers wanted to see. If King Di-Xin desired reassurance, diviners might interpret ambiguous cracks favourably. Alternatively, if diviners genuinely believed cracks indicated danger but the king ignored their warnings, the responsibility lies with leadership, not the divination system. Modern scholars debate whether the oracle bones truly predicted the Zhou rebellion, or simply recorded anxieties that any ruling dynasty would have about subject peoples. From a rationalist perspective, the Shang were concerned about the Zhou because the Zhou were growing powerful. The anxiety was justified. The rebellion was predictable, based on observable political and military factors. The oracles reflected this awareness. However, in Shang cultural context, the oracles were understood as communication with divine forces. Ancestors and spirits provided guidance. The cracks were not random, but revealed hidden truths. The Shang believed their system worked. When the dynasty fell as the oracles warned, it confirmed the system's validity to contemporaries and later historians. The Zhou conquest is well documented in later Chinese texts, though these were written by the victors and must be read critically. The Shujing, Book of Documents, contains Zhou proclamations justifying the rebellion. These texts emphasize that heaven ordained the change. The Shang had become corrupt. Heaven transferred the mandate to the Zhou. The oracles warning the Shang are cited as evidence that heaven provided warnings before withdrawing support. This establishes a pattern repeated throughout Chinese history. Dynasties fall when they lose the mandate of heaven. Signs and omens warn of heaven's displeasure. If rulers ignore the warnings, they are overthrown. The prophecy becomes self-fulfilling in a sense. When signs of trouble appear, if rulers fail to correct course, their authority erodes. People believe heaven has withdrawn favour. Rebellion becomes morally justified. The dynasty falls. The Shang oracle bone prophecies represent an early example of recorded predictions aligned with historical outcome. The warnings existed before the event. The event occurred as warned. Whether divinely revealed or politically astute observation, the oracles proved accurate. The Shang fell, the Zhou rose. Heaven's will was demonstrated through historical change. Mandate of heaven. The mandate of heaven concept developed by the Zhou dynasty became central to Chinese political philosophy. It held that heaven granted authority to rule to virtuous leaders. When rulers became corrupt or incompetent, heaven withdrew the mandate. Natural disasters, famines, floods, earthquakes. These were signs of heaven's displeasure. Successful rebellion proved that heaven had transferred the mandate to new rulers. This is both a political theory and a prophetic framework. The theory predicts that corrupt dynasties will fall. Throughout Chinese history, this prediction was repeatedly fulfilled. Dynasties rose, flourished, declined, and collapsed. Each time, the pattern reinforced belief in the mandate of heaven. The Zhou themselves fell eventually. After ruling for nearly 800 years, their power fragmented during the Warring States period. Multiple kingdoms fought for supremacy. The Qin dynasty emerged victorious, unifying China in 221 BCE under Qin Shi Huang. The Qin presented their victory as heaven transferring the mandate. The Zhou had declined into weakness. Heaven chose new rulers. The Qin dynasty lasted only 15 years. It was harsh and oppressive. Rebellions broke out. The Qin fell. The Han dynasty replaced them. Again, the pattern held. Tyranny and misrule led to loss of the mandate. Heaven supported the Han. The Han ruled for approximately 400 years before fragmenting. Regional warlords fought during the Three Kingdoms period. Eventually, the Jin dynasty reunified China. The cycle continued through Chinese history. Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing. Each dynasty rose, claiming heaven's favour, and fell when they lost it. The prophecy inherent in the mandate of heaven is that misrule leads to downfall. This is not supernatural prediction, but observation of political reality. Governments that fail to maintain legitimacy, cannot provide security, or lose popular support will eventually face rebellion. If rebellions succeed, the government falls. The Mandate of Heaven framework interprets this pattern as divine will. Natural disasters played a crucial role in the mandate's application. Floods along the Yellow River, droughts causing famine, earthquakes destroying cities, these were interpreted as heaven's warnings. Rulers were expected to respond with virtue. They should reduce taxes, cancel debts, provide relief to suffering populations. If rulers ignored disasters or responded inadequately, they demonstrated they had lost heaven's favour. This created a self-fulfilling prophecy mechanism. When disasters occurred during a weak or unpopular reign, people interpreted them as signs that heaven opposed the ruler. Belief in lost mandate justified rebellion. Rebels presented themselves as heaven's instruments, overthrowing corrupt rulers to restore proper order. If the rebellion succeeded, it proved heaven supported the rebels. If it failed, it proved the dynasty still held the mandate. The system provided both stability and flexibility. It supported existing rulers by claiming divine sanction, but it also provided a framework for legitimate regime change. Dynasties could not rule indefinitely, regardless of performance. They had to maintain virtue and competence. Failure meant loss of mandate, justifying their overthrow. Confucianism reinforced the mandate of heaven. Confucian scholars served as advisors to rulers, reminding them of their responsibilities. A good ruler practiced benevolence, justice, and ritual propriety. A bad ruler was tyrannical, unjust, and ignored proper conduct. Confucian philosophers documented signs of heaven's displeasure. Their writings created records showing how and why dynasties lost the mandate. Western observers sometimes view the mandate of heaven as mere political propaganda. Rulers used it to justify their power. Rebels used it to justify revolution. Both sides claimed heaven's support. Whoever won declared heaven had been on their side all along. This interpretation has merit. The mandate served ideological functions for various political actors. However, the system also encoded genuine political wisdom. Governments derive legitimacy from performance. When governments fail, people rebel. Successful rebellions replace failed governments. The Mandate of Heaven framework described this reality in religious language. The prediction that corrupt rulers would fall was consistently fulfilled because it described observable political dynamics. The concept influenced Chinese thought for over 2,000 years. Even after the fall of the Shang dynasty in 1911 and the end of imperial rule, the mandate's logic persisted. The Communist Revolution in 1949 was interpreted by some through mandate framework. The nationalist government had become corrupt and lost popular support. Heaven, or historical necessity in Marxist terms, supported the communists. Their victory proved it. Modern Chinese government legitimacy still depends on performance. The Communist Party maintains power partly by delivering economic growth and stability. If these fail, the party's legitimacy could erode. The mandate of heaven's core logic, that rulers must perform adequately or face overthrow, remains relevant even in secular, modern contexts. The prophecy of the mandate of heaven is therefore both ancient and ongoing. It predicts that all governments will eventually fail if they become inadequate. History repeatedly confirms this. Empires fall, kingdoms collapse, republics fragment. The mandate provides a framework for understanding why. Whether understood religiously or politically, the prediction holds. Bad government leads to downfall. This truth transcends cultures and eras. Pharaoh Djoser's Famine. The Famine Stela is an inscription carved on a rock on Sahel Island in the Nile near Aswan, Egypt. It purports to describe events during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser of the 3rd dynasty, approximately 2700 BCE. According to the inscription, Egypt suffered 7 years of famine. The Nile failed to flood adequately, crops failed, people starved. Djoser consulted his high official Imhotep, seeking solutions. Imhotep researched ancient texts and discovered that the god Khnum controlled the Nile's flood. Khnum had been neglected. His temple on Elephantine Island needed restoration and endowment. Imhotep advised Djoser to appease Khnum. The pharaoh issued decrees granting land and resources to Khnum's temple. That night, Khnum appeared to Djoser in a dream. The god promised to restore the Nile's flood. The next year, the flood came. Famine ended, Egypt prospered. The inscription presents this as a prophecy fulfilled. The prediction was implicit in recognizing Khnum's power. Once the god was properly honored, he would restore abundance. The prophecy came through divine dream and was immediately fulfilled. However, there is a significant problem. The Famine Stela was not carved during Djoser's reign. It dates to the Ptolemaic period, approximately 150 BCE, over 2,500 years after Djoser. The inscription is a later composition attributing events to the distant past. Why create such a text so long after the supposed events? The most likely explanation is that the priests of Khnum at Elephantine created the stela to justify their temple's privileges. By claiming ancient royal decrees from a legendary pharaoh, they supported their contemporary claims to land and resources. The famine story provided a mythological foundation for temple rites. Djoser was a renowned pharaoh associated with Imhotep, who later became a god of wisdom and medicine. Invoking these figures lent authority to the Ha text. Despite the late date, the story may contain echoes of real events. Egypt did experience famines when Nile floods failed. Climate variations, upstream conditions, or other factors occasionally disrupted the annual flood that Egyptian agriculture depended upon. 7-year famines are mentioned in other ancient texts, including the biblical story of Joseph in Egypt. The motif may reflect actual historical experience of prolonged drought cycles. The prophecy aspect in the famine stela is the god Khnum's promise to restore the flood. Once properly honoured, the god acted, the flood returned, famine ended. From the text's perspective, this demonstrates that religious devotion brings tangible results. Gods control natural phenomena, honouring them ensures prosperity. Modern understanding recognises that Nile floods depend on rainfall in the Ethiopian highlands, where the Blue Nile originates. Variations in rainfall cause variations in flood levels. Ancient Egyptians did not understand this hydrological system. They attributed flood variations to divine will. If floods failed, gods were angry. If floods returned, gods were appeased. The famine stela represents a type of prophecy common in ancient cultures. A problem exists. Religious authorities diagnose the cause, divine displeasure. They prescribe a solution, appeasement rituals. The solution is implemented. The problem resolves. This is attributed to successful prophecy and divine intervention. Whether the problem would have resolved anyway is unprovable. Natural cycles operate regardless of human ritual. But in religious frameworks, correlation is interpreted as causation. Despite its late composition, the Famine stela became part of Egyptian tradition. Visitors to Sahel Island can see the inscription today. It connects the site to ancient royal and divine history. For Egyptians and later visitors, the text demonstrated the power of traditional gods and the piety of ancient pharaohs. From a historical perspective, the stela is less about fulfilled prophecy and more about cultural memory and religious legitimation. Yet it illustrates how prophecy functions in traditional societies. Divine warnings and promises are recorded. When events align with these narratives, they are cited as proof of divine power and the importance of maintaining religious observance. The 7-year famine motif appears in multiple ancient Near Eastern cultures. It may represent an archetypal pattern, a remembered catastrophe that different cultures incorporated into their traditions. Whether a specific 7-year famine occurred in Joseph's time is uncertain, but the persistence of the motif suggests that prolonged droughts and famines were real enough experiences that they became embedded in cultural memory, emerging in texts like the Famine stela, centuries or millennia later. Destruction of Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, one of the ancient world's most powerful and feared states. At its height in the 7th century BCE, Assyria controlled territory from Egypt to Persia. Nineveh was a great city with massive walls, palaces, libraries and temples. It seemed invincible. The prophets Nahum and Zephaniah prophesied Nineveh's complete destruction. Nahum's entire book focuses on this theme. He describes Nineveh as a bloody city, full of violence and cruelty. The Assyrians were known for their brutal military tactics. Conquered peoples were impaled, flayed or deported. Cities were razed. Nahum declared that God would destroy Nineveh utterly. The city would be left desolate. Wild animals would make their homes in the ruins. Zephaniah added that Nineveh would become a wasteland, dry as a desert. Flocks would lie down there. Birds would nest in the rubble. Passing travellers would mock the fallen city. These prophecies were bold. Assyria dominated the region. Prophesying its capital's destruction would have seemed absurd to many contemporaries. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Medes, Babylonians, and other peoples attacked Nineveh. According to ancient sources, heavy rains caused the Tigris River to flood. Part of Nineveh's massive walls collapsed. The attackers poured through the breach. The city was sacked and burned. The Assyrian king, Sin-shar-ishkun, died in the flames. The empire rapidly collapsed. Within a few years, Assyria ceased to exist as an independent power. The destruction was thorough. Nineveh was abandoned. Unlike Babylon, which was conquered but continued as a major city, Nineveh disappeared from history. The site was eventually forgotten. For centuries, no one knew where Nineveh had been. Travelers passed mounds of earth near modern Mosul in Iraq, without realizing they were walking over the remains of one of antiquity's greatest cities. Only in the 19th century did archaeologists identify and excavate Nineveh. They found the ruins exactly as prophesied. The city had been thoroughly destroyed. It was never rebuilt. Wild animals and birds had indeed inhabited the ruins for centuries. Travellers had passed by without recognizing what lay buried beneath the earth. The specificity of the prophecy is notable. Nahum and Zephaniah did not simply predict that Nineveh would face difficulties or decline. They predicted total destruction and permanent abandonment. This is exactly what happened. The contrast with Babylon is instructive. Prophets also predicted Babylon's fall, and it did fall to Persia, but Babylon continued as a city for centuries afterward. Nineveh did not. The historical context helps explain the prophecies. Assyria made many enemies through its harsh rule. Subject peoples hated Assyrian domination. Prophets like Nahum spoke to oppressed populations who longed for Assyria's downfall. The prophecies reflected widespread desires and observations of Assyria's growing weaknesses. By the time of Nahum's prophecy, Assyria was indeed weakening. Internal conflicts, overextension, and pressure from rising powers like Babylon and Media created vulnerabilities. An astute observer could see that Assyria might fall. Predicting the capital's destruction was not purely supernatural. It was informed analysis combined with hopeful expectation. However, The completeness of the fulfillment goes beyond reasonable political prediction. Cities conquered in ancient warfare usually continued in some form. They might be damaged, but they were often rebuilt, sometimes by the conquerors themselves. Nineveh was not. It vanished so completely that its location was lost. This level of destruction and abandonment was unusual. The prophecies also described how Nineveh would fall, through flood and breach of walls. Ancient sources confirm this is what happened. The Tigris flooded. Walls collapsed. The specific detail aligns with the historical record. Later, Jewish and Christian traditions viewed Nineveh's destruction as divine judgment against Assyria's cruelty. The city became a symbol of pride and violence, meeting inevitable downfall. The Book of Jonah presents Nineveh as a wicked city that temporarily repented but later returned to evil, sealing its fate. Islamic tradition also remembers Nineveh. The city is associated with the prophet Jonah, called Yunus in Arabic. A mosque supposedly marking Jonah's tomb stood on the site until it was destroyed by ISIS in 2014. The destruction echoed ancient prophecies. Nineveh cannot maintain permanence. Even monuments built over its ruins eventually fall. The ruins of Nineveh can be visited today. The mounds of Kuyunjik and Nebi Yunus contain the buried city. Archaeologists have recovered palaces, sculptures, and most famously, the library of Ashurbanipal, one of the ancient world's greatest collections of texts. These artifacts reveal Assyrian culture's sophistication, even as they confirm the city's complete political destruction. Nineveh's fall fulfilled prophecy in detail and timing. The predictions were made. The city fell as foretold. It was never rebuilt. The accuracy serves as a reminder that empires, regardless of power, are not eternal. Assyria dominated the Near East for centuries, yet it fell within a generation once decline began. The prophecies recognized this truth. All earthly kingdoms eventually crumble. Nineveh's fate demonstrated it. Fall of Samaria and the Northern Kingdom. Following Solomon's death around 930 BCE, the United Kingdom of Israel split. 10 northern tribes formed the Kingdom of Israel, with its capital at Samaria. 2 southern tribes remained loyal to David's dynasty, forming the Kingdom of Judah with Jerusalem as capital. The northern kingdom was larger and wealthier, but it proved unstable. Dynasties rose and fell through coups and assassinations. Prophets Amos and Micah warned that the northern kingdom would fall. They condemned Israel's social injustices, idolatry, and moral corruption. The wealthy oppressed the poor. Worship of foreign gods was tolerated or encouraged. Amos declared that Israel would be taken into exile beyond Damascus. Micah added that Samaria would be reduced to ruins, its stones rolled down into the valley below. The political situation supported such predictions. The rising power of Assyria threatened all smaller states in the region. Assyria demanded tribute from Israel. When Israel withheld payment or sought alliances with Egypt against Assyria, military response was inevitable. In 722 BCE, after a 3-year siege, Samaria fell to Assyrian king Sargon II. The Assyrian policy was deportation. Tens of thousands of Israelites were exiled to distant parts of the empire. Foreigners were resettled in Israel's territory. The 10 northern tribes were scattered. They never returned as a cohesive group. They became the legendary 10 lost tribes of Israel. The archaeological record confirms Samaria's destruction. Excavations show burn layers and destruction debris from this period. The city continued to exist, but under foreign control with a mixed population. The Kingdom of Israel, as an independent entity, ceased to exist. The prophecy was fulfilled. The specificity of Micah's prophecy about Samaria becoming ruins with stones rolled into the valley is striking. Later destructions of Samaria, particularly during the Hasmonean period in the 2nd century BCE, involved demolishing buildings and casting stones down the hillside. The city was built on a hill. Destroying it meant literally rolling stones down into the valleys below. The exile of the northern tribes became one of Judaism's great mysteries and tragedies. What happened to the 10 tribes? Where did they go? Various groups throughout history have claimed descent from the lost tribes. From Ethiopia's Beta Israel to Afghanistan's Pashtuns, legends and genetic studies have sought to trace the exiles' descendants. None have been definitively proven. The prophets presented the fall of Samaria as inevitable consequence of sin. The kingdom had abandoned God. Social injustice prevailed. Foreign gods were worshipped. Divine patience had limits. Punishment would come through human agency, Assyria, but it was divinely ordained. From a historical perspective, the fall of Samaria was predictable based on geopolitical realities. A small kingdom could not indefinitely resist. A vast empire. The prophet's warnings reflected clear-sighted analysis of Israel's position. Rebellion against Assyria would bring destruction. The prophecies were fulfilled because they accurately assessed the political situation. However, the moral and theological framework the prophets provided gave the disaster meaning. It was not random misfortune, it was judgment. The northern kingdom fell because it failed morally and religiously. The southern kingdom, Judah, should learn from this. If Judah continued in the same path, it would face the same fate. This prediction also proved accurate. Judah fell to Babylon in 586 BCE. The fall of the northern kingdom left Judah as the sole surviving heir of the Israelite covenant tradition. Jerusalem and its temple became the exclusive center of worship. The southern perspective on the north's fall, preserved in biblical texts, emphasized that the northern kingdom had been illegitimate from the start. The split from David's dynasty was rebellion against God. The fall of Samaria vindicated the south's claim to be the true Israel. Later Jewish interpretation saw the lost tribe's fate as a warning. Exile was the ultimate punishment for communal sin. God could and would remove a people from their land if they violated covenant obligations. This theology shaped Jewish consciousness through subsequent exiles and dispersions. The prophecy of Samaria's fall and the northern kingdom's exile was fulfilled completely. The predictions were made, the events occurred, the consequences persisted. 10 tribes disappeared into history, the kingdom never returned. Archaeological evidence and historical records confirm the disaster. The prophecy proved accurate in timing, method, and finality. Invasion of Egypt by Nebuchadnezzar. The prophet Ezekiel, writing during the Babylonian exile in the early 6th century BCE, prophesied that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, would invade and conquer Egypt. This prediction seemed unlikely. Egypt was a major power. It had successfully resisted Babylonian expansion previously. Egyptian pharaohs maintained strong military forces and formidable defenses. Ezekiel's prophecy specified that Egypt would become a desolate wasteland for 40 years. The country would be depopulated. Egyptians would be scattered among nations. After 40 years, they would return. But Egypt would never again be a great power. It would become the lowliest of kingdoms. The historical record of Nebuchadnezzar's Egyptian campaigns is fragmentary. Babylonian chronicles record a campaign into Egypt in 568 or 567 BCE. The extent of Babylonian control is unclear. They did not conquer all of Egypt, but they raided deeply into Egyptian territory, demonstrating Egypt's vulnerability. Egypt did decline dramatically after this period. It never regained its former status as a regional superpower. Following the Persian conquest in 525 BCE by Cambyses II, Egypt became a province of foreign empires. Persians, Greeks under Alexander, and the Ptolemies, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs all ruled Egypt. Native Egyptian rule did not return until the 20th century, and even then, modern Egypt is a nation-state, not an ancient-style empire. The prophecy that Egypt would become the lowliest of kingdoms is interpreted as fulfilled. Egypt survived as a geographic and cultural entity, unlike Assyria which disappeared, but it never again dominated neighbouring regions. It became subject to foreign powers for over 2,000 years. This matches Ezekiel's prediction that Egypt would be the lowliest kingdom existing, but subordinate. The 40-year desolation is more problematic. No historical evidence suggests Egypt was completely depopulated for 40 years. Ezekiel might have used 40 symbolically. In biblical literature, 40 often represents a generation or a period of trial rather than a literal number. Alternatively, the prophecy might refer to severe disruption during the Babylonian and subsequent Persian invasions, even if complete depopulation did not occur. Critics argue the prophecy was not fulfilled literally. Egypt was not desolated. It continued functioning under various rulers. The Babylonian campaign was limited. However, supporters note that the core prediction, Egypt's permanent decline from superpower status, was fulfilled. Egypt never again ruled an empire, it became subject to foreign domination. The prophecy's fulfillment depends on interpretation. If taken literally in all details, it was not fulfilled. If understood as predicting Egypt's permanent decline and subordination, it was fulfilled. The trajectory Ezekiel described, Egypt falling from greatness to persistent weakness, matches historical reality. Nebuchadnezzar's invasion, limited as it was, marked a turning point. Egypt had long been a refuge for those fleeing Babylonian power. Jewish refugees fled there after Jerusalem's destruction. Ezekiel prophesied among these exiles. His warnings that Egypt could not protect them proved true. Babylon reached Egypt. No place in the region was safe from Babylonian power. The psychological impact of Egyptian weakness was significant. For centuries, Egypt had been a model of stability and power. Its decline demonstrated that no kingdom was invulnerable. The gods of Egypt could not protect the country from Babylon's might. For Judeans in exile, this reinforced monotheistic theology. All nations were under God's control. Babylon's victories did not prove Babylonian gods were stronger. They proved that the God of Israel used Babylon as an instrument of judgment against all nations, including Egypt. Later history confirmed Egypt's subordinate status, even when Egypt regained temporary independence, as during the Site period or under the Ptolemies. It was a shadow of its former glory. The Ptolemies were Greek, not Egyptian. They ruled Egypt, but were not of Egypt. Similarly, later Muslim dynasties ruled from Egypt, but as part of larger empires, not as Egyptian imperial powers. Modern Egypt is a significant nation with a large population and regional influence. However, it does not dominate its neighbours as ancient Egypt once did. It has not been the lowliest kingdom in terms of poverty or weakness, but it has not been a superpower. Ezekiel's prophecy, interpreted as predicting permanent decline from imperial status, was fulfilled. The invasion of Egypt by Nebuchadnezzar, predicted by Ezekiel, occurred. The long-term consequences Ezekiel foresaw, Egypt's permanent subordination, also occurred. Whether through divine revelation or astute political analysis, the prophecy proved accurate in its essential claims. Disappearance of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. 3 small kingdoms bordered ancient Israel and Judah. Edom lay to the southeast, Moab to the east across the Dead Sea, and Ammon to the northeast. These kingdoms were rivals, and sometimes enemies of Israel. They spoke related languages and shared cultural roots with the Israelites. Biblical genealogies present Edomites, Moabites, and Ammonites as descended from relatives of Abraham. Multiple prophets predicted the destruction and disappearance of these kingdoms. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Obadiah, and others pronounced judgment against Edom, Moab, and Ammon. The prophecies varied in details but shared common themes. These nations would be destroyed. Their cities would become ruins. Their peoples would disappear. Wild animals would inhabit their territories. Obadiah's entire short book focuses on Edom. He declares that Edom will be completely destroyed, its wise men will perish, its warriors will fail, the nation will cease to exist. Jeremiah adds that Edom's cities will become objects of horror. Moab receives similar treatment. Jeremiah prophesies that Moab will be destroyed and broken down, its cities will become desolate. Ammon is told its capital, Rabbah, will become a desolate mound. These prophecies were fulfilled gradually over centuries. The Babylonian campaigns that destroyed Judah also devastated the surrounding kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar conquered Ammon and Moab. Edom suffered invasions from multiple sources. The kingdoms weakened and fragmented. During the Hellenistic period, Arab tribes moved into the regions. The Nabateans, an Arab people, occupied Edomite territory, establishing their capital at Petra. Edomites were pushed westward into southern Judea, where they became known as Idumeans. They lost their homeland. Moabite and Ammonite territories also fell under Nabatean and later Roman control. The distinct national identities dissolved. By the Roman period, Edom, Moab, and Ammon no longer existed as political entities. The peoples were assimilated into larger populations. The languages ceased to be spoken, the cultures were absorbed, the archaeological sites of their cities were abandoned, becoming ruins as prophesied. Modern Jordan occupies the territories of ancient Moab and Ammon. Modern Israel and the Palestinian territories include former Edomite land, but these are modern nation-states with no continuity with the ancient kingdoms. The peoples known as Edomites, Moabites, and Ammonites are gone. Their bloodlines may persist in modern populations, but their distinct identities vanished. The prophecies did not predict immediate apocalyptic destruction. Instead, they foresaw gradual decline, conquest by foreign powers, loss of independence, cultural assimilation, and eventual disappearance as distinct peoples. This is exactly what occurred. The process took centuries, but the end result was complete. Critics note that many small ancient kingdoms disappeared. This was normal historical process. Peoples conquered, assimilated, or migrated. That Edom, Moab, and Ammon vanished is not unique. However, the prophets specifically predicted their disappearance, while these kingdoms still existed and seemed stable. The predictions were documented in texts preserved by Judah. When the prophecies were fulfilled, they were remembered. The survival of Judah's textual tradition allows verification. The prophecies exist in biblical books. The historical outcome can be checked against these predictions. Edom, Moab, and Ammon disappeared. Judah, despite being conquered and exiled multiple times, survived as a distinct people. Jews maintained identity through diaspora. Edomites, Moabites, and Ammonites did not. This contrast was interpreted theologically. Judah survived because of covenant relationship with God. The surrounding nations that opposed Judah were judged and destroyed. Their disappearance vindicated the prophetic warnings. God controls the fate of nations. Those who oppose God's purposes are swept away. From a secular perspective, Judah's survival resulted from unique factors. Strong religious identity centered on texts and practices that could be maintained without territory or temple. The Jewish diaspora developed institutions and traditions allowing cultural persistence despite dispersion. The neighboring kingdoms lacked these. They depended on territorial continuity and political independence. Once lost, they could not reconstitute themselves. Archaeological expeditions have explored ancient Edomite, Moabite, and Ammonite sites. Ruins confirm they were once significant kingdoms. Inscriptions in Moabite and Ammonite languages survive, showing they had literate cultures, but these are archaeological artifacts, not living traditions. The peoples are gone. The Mesha Stele, a Moabite inscription from the 9th century BCE, records King Mesha's victories over Israel. It provides Moab's perspective on conflicts described in biblical texts. The stone survives in the Louvre Museum, but no Moabite people remain to read it in their ancestral language. It stands as a monument to a vanished civilization, exactly as the prophets foretold. Edom's fate is particularly noted in Jewish tradition. Edomites were blamed for rejoicing when Jerusalem fell to Babylon. Psalm 137 includes bitter denunciations of Edom. Obadiah's prophecy against Edom is seen as divine response to Edomite gloating. The complete disappearance of Edom is viewed as poetic justice. They celebrated Judah's fall. They themselves vanished. Judah survived and returned. The prophecies against Edom, Moab, and Ammon were fulfilled. These kingdoms and peoples disappeared from history. Their territories are occupied by others. Their languages are dead. Their cultures are studied only by archaeologists. The predictions made by Hebrew prophets came true completely over the course of centuries. The death of King Herod Agrippa I. Herod Agrippa I ruled Judea from the year 41 to 44. He was a grandson of Herod the Great and had close ties to the Roman imperial family. Agrippa was well liked by many of his Jewish subjects because he supported the temple and followed Jewish law, at least in public. But he also acted harshly against the early Christian community, ordering the execution of James, the brother of John, and putting Peter in prison. According to the Acts of the Apostles and the Jewish historian Josephus, Agrippa's death was sudden and dramatic. Both sources describe the same event with similar details. Agrippa appeared in public wearing magnificent royal robes. He delivered a speech. The crowd, either spontaneously or at his prompting, declared him divine, calling him a god rather than a man. The Acts account states that immediately an angel of the Lord struck Agrippa down because he did not give glory to God. He was eaten by worms and died. Josephus provides a similar description without the angel. He says Agrippa accepted the crowd's flattery instead of rejecting it. Immediately after, he was seized with terrible pains in his abdomen. He was carried away and died 5 days later in agony. Both sources agree on key details. Agrippa accepted divine honours. He was immediately struck by illness. He died shortly after. Josephus adds that Agrippa saw an owl, which he interpreted as a bad omen. Earlier in his life, an owl's appearance had been interpreted as predicting his rise to power. Now an owl appeared again, and he understood it meant his death. The prophecy aspect is implicit. Those who claim divinity will be struck down. Agrippa's death immediately following his acceptance of divine honours demonstrates this. From the Christian perspective recorded in Acts, God does not tolerate humans claiming divine status. The punishment was swift and public. From Josephus's perspective, Agrippa's death resulted from offending divine powers by accepting inappropriate honours. The owl omen provided warning, which Agrippa recognised but could not avoid. The illness came as the omen predicted. Modern medical analysis suggests Agrippa died from a ruptured appendix or intestinal blockage. The symptoms described, sudden, severe abdominal pain, rapid death within days, match these conditions. Josephus's description of worms might refer to intestinal parasites visible during the illness, or might be metaphorical language for corruption and decay. The timing, falling ill immediately after accepting divine honours, was interpreted as prophetic fulfilment. The principle was stated or implied. Those who claim divinity will be punished. Agrippa claimed divinity. He was immediately punished. The prophecy was fulfilled. This type of prophecy is moral or theological rather than predictive. It states a principle about how reality operates. Divine honours belong to God alone. Humans who accept them will face consequences. When the consequences follow immediately and dramatically, it appears to confirm the principle. Ancient Near Eastern cultures generally accepted that kings had divine or semi-divine status. Pharaohs were gods. Roman emperors were deified. Hellenistic rulers accepted divine honours. For Jews and Christians, monotheism rejected this. God alone was divine. Any human claiming divinity committed the ultimate sin. Agrippa, though Jewish, accepted divine acclamation from a pagan audience. This made him guilty of the same sin as pagan rulers. The Christian community saw Agrippa's death as divine judgment. He had persecuted the church. He had executed James. He had imprisoned Peter. Now God struck him down. The message was clear. God protects his people. Those who attack the church face divine punishment. This interpretation encouraged persecuted Christians. Their persecutors would not prevail. The historical record confirms Agrippa died suddenly in 44 CE. The circumstances described by Acts and Josephus are consistent. Whether divine judgment, natural disease, or coincidence, the event occurred as described. The prophecy, understood as the principle that those who claim divinity will be punished, was fulfilled in Agrippa's death. Later, Christian tradition embellished the story. Medieval accounts describe the worms eating Agrippa alive in lurid detail. These elaborations went beyond the biblical or Josephan accounts, but they show how the story functioned as a warning. Pride leads to fall. Claiming divinity brings death. Agrippa's fate demonstrated this to each generation that retold the story. Agrippa's death left a power vacuum. His son, Agrippa II was too young to rule. Judea returned to direct Roman administration under procurators. The relationship between Jewish population and Roman authorities deteriorated. This eventually led to the Jewish revolt in 66 CE and the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. In this sense, Agrippa's death had long-term consequences. He was the last king to rule Judea with any semblance of legitimacy. After him came the spiral toward disaster. The prophecy of Agrippa's death, whether understood as divine warning, moral principle, or coincidental timing, was fulfilled. He accepted divine honours. He died immediately afterward in terrible circumstances. The account is documented in both Christian and Jewish sources. The event occurred as described. The interpretation may vary, but the fulfillment is undeniable. Fall of Elam. Elam was an ancient civilization in what is now southwestern Iran. Elamites were rivals to Mesopotamian powers. They fought wars against Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. At times, Elam dominated Mesopotamia. Elamite kings sacked Babylon and carried off the famous law code of Hammurabi as booty. The prophet Jeremiah, writing in the 6th century BCE, declared that Elam would be destroyed. He prophesied that God would break the bow of Elam, their chief strength. The four winds would scatter Elamites to all directions. There would be Elamites in every nation, yet Elam itself would be destroyed. In the latter days, God would restore Elam's fortunes, but the nation as it existed would end. The prophecy was fulfilled through Achaemenid Persian expansion. When Cyrus the Great founded the Persian Empire in the mid-6th century BCE, Elam was incorporated into it. The Elamite kingdom ceased to exist as an independent power. The Elamite capital, Susa, became one of the Persian Empire's administrative centers. The Elamite language continued in use for a time, but gradually Aramaic and later Persian replaced it. The bow of Elam being broken refers to military power. Elamite archers were famous. The bow symbolized their strength. When Elam fell to Persia, its military independence ended. Elamite soldiers were incorporated into Persian armies. They no longer fought for Elamite kings. The scattering of Elamites to every nation occurred through the Persian Empire's systems. Persians practiced mass population transfers. They moved peoples across the empire to prevent rebellions and mixed populations. Elamites were dispersed. Some appeared as far away as Egypt, serving in Persian garrisons. Aramaic documents from the Jewish community at Elephantine in Egypt mention Elamite soldiers. Elam as a distinct civilization disappeared over the following centuries. The Elamite language died out. The culture was absorbed into Persian and later Islamic civilizations. Modern Iranians have Elamite ancestry, but Elam as a nation and identity vanished. The prophecy about restoration in the latter days is interpreted variously. Some see it fulfilled in the region's importance within the Persian Empire. Others understand it as a future eschatological promise. The core prediction, Elam's destruction as an independent power and the dispersal of Elamites, was fulfilled historically. Critics note that Jeremiah wrote at a time when Persian power was rising. Elam's vulnerability was observable. Predicting its fall to Persia would not require supernatural foresight. However, the specific details about scattering and the bow being broken align with historical outcomes. Elam is less well known than contemporaneous civilizations like Egypt or Babylon, but it was significant. Elamite inscriptions exist in their unique language, which is not related to any known language family. It remains only partially deciphered. Elamite art and architecture influenced Persia. The famous Achaemenid palace complex at Persepolis incorporates Elamite artistic traditions. The archaeological site of Susa has revealed Elamite ziggurats, palaces, and artifacts spanning thousands of years. But Susa also contains Persian, Greek, Parthian, and Sasanian remains. It was continuously occupied through multiple civilizations. Elam itself was buried beneath later layers, both literally in archaeological strata and figuratively in historical memory. The prophet Jeremiah's inclusion of Elam among nations to be judged is interesting. Elam was not a direct enemy of Judah, it was geographically distant, yet Jeremiah placed it in the same category as Egypt, Babylon, Moab, and other nations receiving prophetic judgment. The implication was that God controlled all nations. Geographic distance was irrelevant. Divine sovereignty extended everywhere. The fulfillment of the prophecy demonstrated this. Elam, far from Judah, fell as predicted. The Elamites scattered, the kingdom dissolved, the prophecy proved accurate. For later Jewish readers, this confirmed prophetic authority. If distant Elam fell as foretold, then other prophecies should also be trusted. Modern Iranians in Khuzestan province, ancient Elam's heartland, sometimes claim Elamite heritage. Archaeological sites are points of pride, but there is no continuity of language or culture. Elamite civilization is as extinct as Assyrian or Sumerian. It exists only in archaeological remains and ancient texts. Jeremiah's prophecy against Elam was fulfilled. The kingdom fell, the people scattered, the language died, the culture dissolved. The accuracy of this prediction, along with others Jeremiah made, established his status as a true prophet. His warnings about Judah's fall, fulfilled in the Babylonian exile, were validated by the parallel fulfillment of prophecies against foreign nations like Elam. The storm stele of King Ahmose I. The storm stele is an ancient Egyptian inscription from the reign of Pharaoh Ahmose I, founder of the 18th dynasty, approximately 1550 BCE. The stele describes a catastrophic storm that struck Egypt. The text portrays the storm in apocalyptic terms. Darkness covered the land. Rain fell torrentially. The Nile flooded violently. Buildings collapsed. People and animals died. The gods themselves seemed to be attacking Egypt. Ahmose presents himself as the pharaoh who restored order after this disaster. He rebuilt temples. He re-established offerings to the gods. He repaired damage. The inscription functions as propaganda, demonstrating Ahmose's power and piety. The prophecy aspect relates to omens that supposedly preceded the storm. Egyptian priests interpreted celestial and natural signs as divine communications. Unusual events indicated the gods' intentions. The storm would have been seen as fulfillment of ominous signs. Egyptian religious texts are filled with warnings about divine anger manifesting through natural disasters. Modern scholars connect the storm stele's description to the eruption of Thera, the volcanic island now called Santorini in the Aegean Sea. Thera erupted catastrophically around 1500 BCE. The eruption was one of the largest in human history. It destroyed the Minoan settlement on Thera and likely caused tsunamis, ashfall, and climate effects across the eastern Mediterranean. The connection between Thera's eruption and the storm stele is debated. The dating is not exact. Thera's eruption might have occurred decades before or after Ahmose's reign. However, the description in the storm stele matches effects that a massive volcanic eruption could cause. Darkness from ash clouds, torrential rain from disrupted weather patterns, flooding from tsunamis or climate disturbances. If the storm stele describes effects of Thera's eruption, it represents documentation of one of antiquity's greatest natural disasters. The eruption's impact on Mediterranean civilizations was significant. It may have contributed to the decline of Minoan civilization. It influenced Egyptian history during the transition from the Second Intermediate Period to the New Kingdom. The prophetic element is that Egyptian omens would have predicted disaster before the storm. Priests claimed to read signs in the sky, in animal behavior, in dreams. When catastrophe struck, it confirmed their warnings. The gods had spoken. The pharaoh, who responded correctly, making offerings and restoring order, proved his legitimacy. Ahmose's successful response to the crisis strengthened his rule. He had reunified Egypt after expelling the Hyksos invaders. The storm threatened to undermine his achievements. By successfully managing the disaster and restoring stability, Ahmose demonstrated divine favor. The gods tested him. He passed. The storm stele is preserved at the Karnak temple complex. The text can be read today. It provides a window into how ancient Egyptians understood and responded to natural disasters. They did not have scientific frameworks for explaining volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, or extreme weather. They understood these events through religious lenses. The gods controlled nature. Disasters meant divine displeasure or conflict among gods. The prophecy fulfilled in the storm stele is less specific prediction and more general principle. Omens warn of disaster. Disaster comes. Those who respond appropriately survive and prosper. Ahmose followed this pattern. He read the signs, responded to the crisis, and emerged stronger. This type of prophecy is common across ancient cultures. Disasters are interpreted as fulfilling previous warnings. The warnings are often vague enough that any disaster can fulfill them, yet the pattern reinforces belief in prophetic systems. Omens work. The priests were right. The gods speak through signs. Pay attention or face consequences.
Modern understanding of the storm stele's historical context reveals connections between natural events and human history. Volcanic eruptions influence civilizations. Climate anomalies cause famines and migrations. Ancient peoples experienced these events without understanding their natural causes. They created religious explanations. These explanations included prophetic frameworks. Disasters fulfilled divine warnings. The storm stele stands as one of the earliest documented accounts of what might be a volcanic eruption's effects. It shows how ancient rulers used disasters to legitimize their authority. It demonstrates the role of prophecy in ancient societies. Predict disaster. Disaster occurs. Respond.
Effectively, claim vindication. This pattern repeated across cultures and centuries. Ahmose's storm and his response follow the template. Whether the storm stele records Tyre's eruption or some other catastrophic storm, it documents ancient prophecy fulfilled. Egyptian priest warned of disaster. Disaster came. The pharaoh restored order. Egypt survived. The gods were appeased. The system worked as acclaimed. From the Egyptian perspective, the prophecy was accurate. The evidence survives carved in stone, 3,500 years later, still readable, still testifying to ancient understanding of omens, disasters, and divine will.